Rebecca Chen never imagined that living in a quiet suburban neighborhood would turn into a nightmare. She had moved into her townhouse 3 years ago with her son Tyler, who was 16 and practically a computer genius. The kid could fix anything tech-related, and Rebecca was grateful for that because she barely knew how to reset the router herself. Their neighbor, Patricia Hoffman, lived right next door. Patricia was the HOA president, and boy, did she take that job seriously. Too seriously. If you asked anyone in the neighborhood, she was always walking around with her clipboard, measuring things, taking notes, and telling people what they could and couldn't do with their own properties. People called her the HOA Karen behind her back, though nobody dared say it to her face. For the most part, Rebecca tried to stay out of Patricia's way. She kept her lawn trimmed, followed the rules about trash can placement, and painted her front door an approved color. Life was peaceful enough, or at least it was until that Tuesday evening in late September. Tyler was in his room doing homework when he suddenly called out to his mom. Rebecca was in the kitchen making dinner, and she could hear the confusion in his voice. She walked to his room, wooden spoon still in hand, and found him staring at his computer screen with his eyebrows scrunched together. "Mom, something weird is going on with our internet," he said, scrolling through what looked like a bunch of numbers and technical stuff that made no sense to Rebecca. "Is it down?" she asked. That was usually the problem when Tyler mentioned internet issues. "No, it's working, but it's super slow." "Like really slow?" "I was trying to download something for my computer science class and it's taking forever," Tyler explained. He clicked a few more times and then his eyes went wide. "Wait, this is really weird." Rebecca leaned over his shoulder, though she had no idea what she was looking at. The screen was filled with what looked like a list of devices. "What am I looking at, honey?" "These are all the devices connected to our Wi-Fi right now," Tyler said, pointing at the screen. "This is my laptop, this is your phone, this is the smart TV downstairs, and this is my phone." "But look at all these other ones." Rebecca counted them. There were at least 6 or 7 devices she didn't recognize. "Maybe they're from our other stuff? Like the doorbell camera or something?" Tyler shook his head. "I already accounted for all of those. These are not ours, Mom. Someone else is using our internet." A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. "How is that possible? Don't we have a password?" "Yeah, but..." Tyler started clicking through more screens, running some kind of diagnostic program. Someone either guessed it or... Wait, let me check something. For the next 20 minutes, Tyler worked on his computer while Rebecca stood there feeling completely useless. She hated feeling like this. Like technology had passed her by and she needed her teenage son to figure out what was happening in her own house. Finally, Tyler sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Okay, so I traced where these connections are coming from. They're all coming from the same place. Where?" Rebecca asked. Tyler pointed toward the wall that separated their townhouse from Patricia's. "Next door." "From Mrs. Hoffman's house." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I can see the signal strength and the location. She's using our Wi-Fi, Mom. And based on how many devices are connected, she's been doing it for a while." Rebecca didn't know what to feel. Angry, confused, violated? All of the above, probably. She thought about all the times Patricia had lectured her about following the rules, about being a good neighbor, about respecting community standards. And all this time the woman had been stealing from them. "Can you disconnect her?" Rebecca asked. "I could, but I think we should talk to her first. Maybe there's an explanation," Tyler said, though even he sounded doubtful. Rebecca knew he was right. As much as she wanted to just cut Patricia off immediately, the adult thing to do was to address it directly. So the next morning after Tyler left for school, Rebecca walked over to Patricia's door and knocked. Patricia answered wearing a designer tracksuit and holding a cup of coffee. Her hair was perfectly styled even though it was only 8 in the morning. "Rebecca, what a surprise. Is something wrong with your property?" "I haven't noticed any violations lately." The way she said it made it sound like she was constantly watching for violations, which honestly, she probably was. "No, nothing like that," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice friendly. "I just wanted to ask you about something. My son was checking our internet last night, and he noticed that there are some devices from your house connected to our Wi-Fi. Do you know anything about that?" Patricia's face didn't change at all. No embarrassment, no surprise, nothing. She just took a sip of her coffee and nodded. "Oh yes. I've been using your internet." The previous owners gave me the password before they moved out. They said I could use it, Rebecca blinked. That was not the response she expected. I'm sorry, but that doesn't really work for me. That was their decision, not mine. And I need you to stop using our internet. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, a hint of annoyance crossing her face. Well, that seems rather unneighborly. The Johnsons never had a problem with it. They understood that as HOA president, I have certain needs and expenses, and internet is quite costly these days. Rebecca couldn't believe what she was hearing. Patricia drove a brand new luxury SUV. She hosted elaborate HOA parties with catered food. She wore expensive clothes and took regular vacations. And she was claiming she couldn't afford internet? I understand that internet can be expensive, Rebecca said, keeping her tone even. But it's also not my responsibility to provide it for you. I'm going to have to ask you to get your own service. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I see. Well, I hope you understand that this kind of attitude doesn't reflect well on community relations. As HOA president, I value neighbors who are willing to help each other out. There it was, the veiled threat. Rebecca had heard from other neighbors about how Patricia operated. If you didn't do what she wanted, suddenly your property was under scrutiny for every tiny rule violation. I'm sorry you feel that way, Rebecca said firmly. But my decision stands. Please disconnect from our Wi-Fi. She turned and walked back to her house before Patricia could respond. Her heart was pounding. She'd never been good at confrontation, but something about Patricia's entitled attitude made her blood boil. That evening, Tyler changed all their passwords and upgraded their security settings. He set up encryption and changed the network name. He even installed some monitoring software so they could see if anyone tried to connect without permission. That should do it, Tyler said, looking satisfied with his work. She won't be able to get back on now. Rebecca felt relieved. Problem solved, right? She had no idea that this was just the beginning, and that Patricia's reaction to being cut off would be far worse than she could have imagined. It didn't take long for Patricia to realize she'd been locked out. In fact, it took exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes. Rebecca knew this because that's when the pounding started on her front door. She was making dinner again, this time spaghetti, when the aggressive knocking echoed through the house. Tyler looked up from his homework at the kitchen table, and they both knew exactly who it was before Rebecca even opened the door. Patricia stood on the doorstep, her face flushed red, still wearing that expensive tracksuit but now looking decidedly less composed. "What did you do to the internet?" she demanded, not even bothering with a greeting. "I changed my password," Rebecca said calmly. "Like I told you this morning, you need to get your own service, and you can't do that. I was in the middle of something important." Patricia's voice was getting louder, and Rebecca could see a few neighbors starting to peek out their windows. "Patricia, I absolutely can do that. It's my internet service that I pay for," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice level. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but this isn't up for debate. As HOA president, I have a right to certain accommodations from the community," Patricia said, pulling herself up to her full height. "I need that password," Rebecca almost laughed. "That's not how any of this works. The HOA doesn't give you the right to use other people's internet without permission or payment." "Fine," Patricia snapped, "but don't think there won't be consequences for this unneighborly behavior. I'll be reviewing your property very carefully from now on." She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving Rebecca standing in the doorway with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Tyler came up behind her. "Did she just threaten us?" he asked. "I think she did," Rebecca sighed, closing the door. "But what can she really do? We follow all the rules." She would soon find out just how creative Patricia could be when she wanted revenge. The next morning, Rebecca woke up to find a bright orange violation notice stuck to her front door. According to the notice, her trash cans had been placed too far forward on the curb on collection day, extending 3 inches beyond the acceptable boundary line. The fine was $75 3 inches. Patricia had measured her trash can placement and found a 3-inch violation. Rebecca crumpled the notice in her hand, took a deep breath, and tried to tell herself it was just one fine. She'd be more careful about the trash cans next time. 2 days later, another notice appeared. This one claimed that the garden gnome Tyler had given her for Mother's Day 2 years ago was an unapproved decorative item and violated the community aesthetic standards. Another $75 fine. Then came a notice about her car being parked at an improper angle in her own driveway. Then one about her mailbox being a quarter-inch too high. Then one about a weed in her front flower bed that exceeded the acceptable height limit. Within a week, Rebecca had accumulated over $400 in fines. Each violation was technically within the HOA rules, but they were things that Patricia had ignored for the entire 3 years Rebecca had lived there. Every single notice was signed with Patricia's neat signature and stamped with the official HOA seal. Tyler was furious. "This is harassment, Mom. She's clearly doing this because you won't give her the Wi-Fi password." "I know, honey, but technically she's following the rules. She's just choosing to enforce them now when she never did before," Rebecca said, looking at the pile of orange notices on her kitchen counter. "So what do we do?" Rebecca didn't have an answer. She'd never dealt with anything like this before. She decided to reach out to some of the other neighbors to see if anyone else had experienced similar treatment from Patricia. What she discovered was both validating and disturbing. Her next-door neighbor on the other side, Margaret, a retired teacher, invited Rebecca over for coffee. "Oh, honey, you're not the first person Patricia has gone after," Margaret said, shaking her head. "Last year, the Thompsons put up a basketball hoop for their kids. Patricia didn't like it, so suddenly they were getting violation notices for everything under the sun. They ended up moving away after 6 months. She drove them out of the neighborhood?" Rebecca asked, horrified. "That's not all," Margaret continued, lowering her voice. "The Nguyens down the street accidentally planted flowers that were half an inch taller than the approved height. Patricia fined them so much they had to take out a small loan to pay the HOA fees. And the Hendersons painted their shutters what Patricia claimed was the wrong shade of approved colors. She made their lives miserable until they repainted them 3 different times." Rebecca felt sick. "Why doesn't anyone stand up to her?" Margaret sighed. "Most people are scared. She has all the power as HOA president, and she knows the rules inside and out. She uses them as weapons. Anyone who challenges her gets the same treatment you're getting now. We've all just learned to stay on her good side and not make waves." But Rebecca wasn't most people. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. Patricia was essentially bullying the entire neighborhood into submission, using her position to get what she wanted, and punishing anyone who didn't comply. That evening, she sat down with Tyler and told him everything she'd learned. "I think we need to fight this," she said. "Not just for us, but for everyone she's done this to." Tyler nodded, and Rebecca could see that determined look in his eyes. "I might be able to help with that," he said. "Let me do some research." Over the next few days, while Rebecca continued receiving violation notices, Tyler spent his free time on his computer. He was looking into Patricia's background, using public records and legal databases that he'd learned about in his computer science class. Meanwhile, Patricia's campaign of harassment was escalating. She started taking photos of their property at different times of day. Rebecca would look out the window and see Patricia standing on the sidewalk with her phone, documenting every angle of their townhouse. It was creepy and invasive, but technically Patricia was on public property, so there wasn't much Rebecca could do about it. Then Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting. The notice said the meeting was to discuss ongoing community violations and neighbor conduct concerns. Rebecca knew she was the target. The meeting was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. About 20 neighbors showed up, which was more than usual. Rebecca suspected word had gotten around about the conflict. Patricia stood at the front of the room with a projector screen behind her, looking very official with her blazer and her stack of papers. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Tonight we need to address a serious pattern of violations from one of our community members. For the next 15 minutes, Patricia presented a slideshow of every single violation Rebecca had supposedly committed. Photos of the trash cans, the garden gnome, the car at the wrong angle, even a blade of grass that was allegedly too long. It was humiliating. "This pattern of disregard for our community standards cannot continue," Patricia concluded. "I'm recommending that we escalate these violations to legal action if they are not corrected immediately and the fines are not paid." Rebecca stood up, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "I'd like to say something." Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "Go ahead." "I've lived here for 3 years without a single violation notice until last week," Rebecca said, looking around at her neighbors. "The only thing that changed was that I asked Patricia to stop using my Wi-Fi without permission." Everything she's citing in these violations existed before, but she only started enforcing them after I set a boundary she didn't like. This isn't about community standards. This is about retaliation. A murmur went through the room. Rebecca could see some neighbors nodding while others looked uncomfortable. Patricia's face turned red. That is a serious accusation, and it's completely false. I enforce the rules fairly for everyone. Do you? Rebecca challenged. Because Margaret told me about the Thompsons and the Nguyens and the Hendersons. I'm not the first person you've targeted like this. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Patricia was sputtering, trying to regain control of the meeting, but Rebecca had said what needed to be said. That night, lying in bed, Rebecca felt exhausted, but also relieved. She'd stood up to Patricia publicly, and at least some of the neighbors had heard her side of the story. But she also knew this was far from over. Patricia wasn't the type to back down, and Rebecca had just made things very personal. What neither of them knew was that Tyler's research was about to uncover something that would change everything. The Wi-Fi password was just the beginning of Patricia's secrets, and the truth was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The morning after the HOA meeting, Rebecca woke up to find yet another violation notice on her door. This one claimed her front porch light was excessively bright and violated the community's light pollution standards. She crumpled it up without even reading the full details. The fines were now over $2,000, and Patricia was showing no signs of stopping. Tyler was already awake when Rebecca came downstairs, which was unusual for a Saturday morning. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, and he had that intense look on his face that meant he'd found something interesting. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, turning the laptop toward her. Rebecca poured herself a coffee first. She'd learned that when Tyler started talking about his computer discoveries, she needed caffeine to keep up. "What did you find?" "I've been looking into Patricia's background, right? Just public record stuff, nothing illegal," Tyler said quickly. "And I found something really interesting." "Did you know she was fired from her last job?" Rebecca sat down, suddenly much more alert. "No, I didn't. How did you find that out?" "It's all public record because of the lawsuit," Tyler explained. She used to work for a tech company called Innovate Solutions. About 2 years ago, right before she moved into this neighborhood, she was fired for embezzlement. The company sued her, and she settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Rebecca's mind was racing. Patricia had been fired for stealing money from her employer, and now she was stealing internet from her neighbors. It wasn't exactly the same thing, but it showed a pattern of behavior. "That's not all," Tyler continued. "I started looking at some other things, and I found something weird about our network." "Well, not just ours. What do you mean?" Rebecca asked. Tyler pulled up another screen filled with technical information. "I've been monitoring our network since we changed the password, just to make sure Patricia wasn't trying to get back in. But I also started looking at the other Wi-Fi networks in the neighborhood, just to see what was out there, and I found something strange." He pointed to the screen. "See these networks? Most of them have pretty good security, but a few of them don't. And when I checked, I found that several of them have unauthorized devices connected. Just like ours did before we locked Patricia out." "You think she's using other people's Wi-Fi too?" Rebecca asked. "I think she's using a lot of people's Wi-Fi," Tyler said. "I can see at least 6 or 7 networks that have suspicious connections, and they all seem to be routing to the same location." "Patricia's house," Rebecca said, feeling a chill run down her spine. Tyler nodded. "But here's what's really weird. The amount of data being transferred is way more than just normal internet browsing. I'm talking about huge amounts of data. Like business-level amounts. What does that mean?" Rebecca asked. "I'm not sure yet," Tyler admitted, "but I want to find out. Would it be okay if I dug a little deeper? I won't do anything illegal, I promise. Just some monitoring and analysis." Rebecca hesitated. Part of her wanted to just let it go, pay the fines, and try to live quietly. But another part of her, the part that was tired of being pushed around, wanted to know what Patricia was hiding. "Be careful," she finally said. "But yes, see what you can find out." Over the next few days, the harassment from Patricia continued. She started documenting everything Rebecca and Tyler did. Every time they left the house, every time someone visited, every time they took out the trash. It was like living under surveillance, and Rebecca started feeling paranoid in her own home. But other neighbors were starting to reach out. Margaret brought over a casserole and words of encouragement. A man named David from 3 houses down stopped Rebecca while she was getting her mail. and told her he was glad someone was finally standing up to Patricia. A young couple who'd just moved in 6 months ago told her they'd been getting weird vibes from the HOA president and were glad to know they weren't imagining things. It felt good to know she wasn't alone, but it also made Rebecca realize how many people Patricia had intimidated into silence over the years. Meanwhile, Tyler was spending every spare moment on his computer. He'd set up some kind of monitoring system that tracked network activity in the neighborhood. Rebecca didn't understand the technical details, but she could see the determination in her son's eyes. Then, on a Tuesday evening exactly 2 weeks after they'd changed the password, Tyler called Rebecca into his room with an urgency in his voice that made her heart race. "Mom, you need to call the police," he said, his face pale. "What? Why?" Rebecca asked, rushing to his side. "I found something. Something really bad," Tyler said, his hands shaking slightly as he pointed to his screen. "Patricia isn't just stealing Wi-Fi. She's using it for something much worse." He pulled up several windows showing data streams, IP addresses, and what looked like transaction records. "I've been monitoring the data flow from the compromised networks, and I started noticing patterns. Large encrypted files being transferred at odd hours, connections to suspicious overseas servers. So I dug deeper." "Tyler, you're scaring me," Rebecca said. "I found evidence of financial fraud, Mom, like serious fraud. Patricia is running some kind of operation from her house, and she's using other people's internet connections to hide what she's doing. When you use someone else's Wi-Fi, the activity looks like it's coming from their house, not yours. It's a way to avoid getting caught." Rebecca felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "Are you sure about this?" Tyler nodded. "I'm sure. Look, I found records of credit card transactions that don't match any legitimate business. There are multiple identity theft indicators. She's accessing bank accounts, running scams, probably a lot of other stuff, and she's doing it all through the neighborhood Wi-Fi network so it can't be traced back to her." "How many people is she using?" Rebecca asked, feeling sick. "At least 8 different households, maybe more," Tyler said. "Every time someone changes their password or upgrades their security, she moves to someone else. That's why she was so desperate to keep using ours. She needs multiple connections to keep her operation running." Rebecca sat down heavily on Tyler's bed. Everything suddenly made sense. Patricia's desperation for the Wi-Fi access, her extreme reaction when they cut her off, her supposed financial struggles despite obvious signs of wealth. She wasn't just a petty tyrant abusing her HOA power. She was a criminal using her position to keep people scared and distracted, while she committed serious crimes right under their noses. "We need to report this," Rebecca said firmly. "Right now." They called the non-emergency police number, and Rebecca tried to explain what Tyler had found. The operator seemed skeptical at first, but when Rebecca mentioned terms like identity theft and financial fraud, the tone changed. They were told a detective would contact them within the hour. Detective Morrison arrived at their house 45 minutes later. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious expression. Tyler walked him through everything he'd discovered, showing him the data logs, the suspicious connections, and the patterns he'd identified. Morrison listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. "This is good work," he finally said, looking at Tyler with respect. "Really good work. You might have just helped us crack open something much bigger than a neighborhood dispute." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked. "We've been investigating a series of identity theft cases in this area for months," Morrison explained. "Multiple victims, sophisticated operation, but we couldn't track down the source. If what your son found is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it is, you might have just handed us our suspect." He looked at Tyler. "I'm going to need you to write up everything you did and found, every step, every piece of evidence. And I need you to keep monitoring for a few more days while we build our case." "Can you do that?" Tyler nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. But you need to act completely normal," Morrison warned, looking at both of them. "Don't let her know you suspect anything. Don't change your behavior. If she realizes we're onto her, she could destroy evidence or disappear." "Can you do that?" Rebecca thought about all the harassment, all the violation notices, all the stress of the past 2 weeks. Could she really pretend everything was normal while knowing what Patricia was doing? She looked at Tyler, who was nodding with determination, and she felt a surge of pride in her son. He'd uncovered something that could protect not just them, but countless other people. "We can do that," Rebecca said firmly. The next few days were the hardest of Rebecca's life. She had to smile and wave at Patricia like nothing was wrong. She had to accept more violation notices without showing any emotion beyond frustration. She had to watch Patricia walk around the neighborhood with her clipboard, knowing that the woman was using her position as cover for criminal activity. Tyler continued monitoring and documenting everything, working closely with Detective Morrison. Every evening, Morrison would stop by to collect new data and update them on the investigation's progress. "We're getting close," he told them on Friday evening. "We've identified at least 12 victims so far, people whose credit cards or bank accounts were compromised. The total amount stolen is over $200,000. This is a major case." Rebecca could barely sleep that night, knowing that soon everything would come to a head. Patricia had no idea that her carefully constructed facade was abo. The morning everything changed started like any other Saturday. Rebecca was making breakfast while Tyler was already at his computer, monitoring the network activity like he'd been doing for the past week. The normalcy of the routine felt strange, considering what they knew was coming. Detective Morrison had called the night before to tell them that federal agents would be executing a search warrant on Patricia's house sometime that weekend. They'd built a solid case based on Tyler's findings, and other agencies had gotten involved once they realized the scope of Patricia's operation. "Just stay inside and act normal," Morrison had instructed. "Let us handle everything." But around 10 in the morning, Tyler suddenly called out from his room. "Mom, something's happening." Rebecca rushed to his side and looked out his window, which had a partial view of Patricia's townhouse. There were several black SUVs parked on the street, and people in FBI jackets were walking up to Patricia's door. "They're early," Rebecca whispered, her heart pounding. They watched as federal agents knocked on Patricia's door. It took a minute, but eventually Patricia opened it, wearing her usual expensive loungewear, coffee cup in hand. From their vantage point, Rebecca and Tyler couldn't hear what was being said, but they could see Patricia's face go from annoyed to shocked to panicked in a matter of seconds. An agent held up what must have been the warrant, and before Patricia could react, multiple agents moved past her into the house. Patricia stood frozen in her doorway for a moment before being guided aside by one of the agents. "This is really happening," Tyler said quietly. Within minutes, neighbors started emerging from their houses. Rebecca saw Margaret next door peering out her window. David from down the street was standing on his lawn with his arms crossed. The young couple was watching from their porch. Word was spreading fast that something big was going down at the HOA president's house. Rebecca's phone started buzzing with text messages from neighbors asking if she knew what was happening. She didn't respond to any of them. Morrison had been clear that they needed to stay quiet about their involvement for now. For the next 3 hours, they watched as federal agents carried boxes of equipment out of Patricia's house. Computers, hard drives, filing cabinets full of papers, even Patricia's phones and tablets. Everything was being seized as evidence. Patricia herself was let out in handcuffs around 1 in the afternoon. She wasn't crying or yelling. She just looked defeated, her head down as they put her in the back of one of the SUVs. Rebecca felt a strange mix of emotions watching her. Yes, Patricia had made their lives miserable, but seeing anyone led away in handcuffs was sobering. The neighborhood was in chaos. People were gathered in small groups on the street, speculating about what had happened. Rebecca could hear fragments of conversations as she stood on her porch. "I heard it was fraud. Someone said she was running a scam. The HOA president, can you believe it?" Detective Morrison appeared at Rebecca's door around 2 o'clock. He looked tired but satisfied. "Can I come in?" he asked. Inside, he sat at their kitchen table and filled them in on what had happened. "We've arrested Patricia Hoffman on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to computer systems, and several other crimes. The total amount she stole is actually closer to $300,000 now that we've tracked down more victims." "300,000, Rebecca repeated, stunned. Morrison nodded. She was running a sophisticated operation. She'd steal people's Wi-Fi connections, use them to access bank accounts and credit card information, make fraudulent transactions, and the trail would lead back to the neighbors whose internet she was using. Not to her. It was clever, actually. She'd been doing it for at least 2 years, maybe longer. "How did we not know?" Rebecca asked. "How did the victims not notice?" "She was smart about it," Morrison explained. "She'd take small amounts from multiple accounts, not enough to immediately trigger fraud alerts. By the time people noticed and reported it, the trail was cold. She'd also mix in legitimate purchases with the fraudulent ones, making it harder to track. And because she was using other people's internet connections, when investigators traced the IP addresses, they'd end up at innocent neighbors' doors, not hers. Tyler spoke up. That's why she needed so many different connections. If she used just one person's Wi-Fi for everything, they'd eventually be investigated and might figure out what was happening. But by spreading it across multiple households, she made it almost impossible to trace back to her. Exactly, Morrison said. And her position as HOA president was perfect cover. She could keep people intimidated and distracted with petty violations while running her operation. If anyone challenged her or changed their Wi-Fi password, she'd harass them until they either moved away or gave up, and then she'd just find another neighbor to victimize. Rebecca felt sick thinking about how many people Patricia had hurt. What happens now? Now the federal prosecutors build their case, Morrison said. With the evidence we seized today and the documentation Tyler provided, it's pretty much open and shut. She'll likely face decades in prison, and there will be civil lawsuits from the victims seeking restitution. He turned to Tyler. I have to tell you, what you did was remarkable. The way you tracked the network activity, identified the patterns, and documented everything, it made our job so much easier. You might have a future in cybersecurity or law enforcement if you're interested. Tyler's face turned red, but Rebecca could see he was pleased. I just wanted to protect my mom and our neighbors. You did more than that, Morrison said. You exposed a major criminal operation and helped us arrest someone who's been victimizing people for years. After Morrison left, Rebecca and Tyler sat in stunned silence for a while. Everything had happened so fast, and the enormity of what they'd been part of was just starting to sink in. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Rebecca opened it to find Margaret standing there with a concerned expression. Rebecca, dear, what in the world is going on? The whole neighborhood is talking about FBI agents and arrests. Rebecca invited her in and, with Morrison's permission to share the basic facts now that Patricia was in custody, explained what had happened. Margaret's eyes grew wider with each detail. Patricia was stealing from us, using our internet for crimes? Margaret asked, horrified. I gave her my Wi-Fi password last year when she said hers was down, and she needed to check an important HOA email. Oh my God, did she use my connection? Probably, Rebecca admitted gently. Tyler found evidence that she was using at least 8 different neighbors' Wi-Fi networks. Margaret sat down heavily. I can't believe it. All this time she was using her power as HOA president to cover up criminal activity. And we all just let her bully us because we were afraid of petty fines and violation notices. Don't blame yourself, Rebecca said. She was very good at manipulation. She knew exactly how to keep people scared and compliant. Over the next few hours, more neighbors stopped by or called. Rebecca found herself telling the story over and over. Each person had the same reaction. Shock, followed by anger, followed by guilt for not standing up to Patricia sooner. David from down the street came by around dinner time. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. I've been dealing with Patricia's harassment for over a year. She had it out for me because I questioned one of her HOA decisions at a meeting. I was actually thinking about selling my house and moving just to get away from her. What you and your son did exposing her like this, you saved a lot of people from a lot of pain. That evening, Rebecca's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize.
Hello?
Hi, is this Rebecca Chen? This is Amanda Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're covering the story about the HOA president who was arrested for fraud, and we'd like to interview you and your son about your role in exposing the crimes. Rebecca felt a wave of anxiety. She hadn't thought about media attention. I need to think about that. Of course, Amanda said smoothly. But I should tell you, this is a big story. Multiple news outlets are going to be covering it. It might be better to tell your side of things rather than let other people speculate. After she hung up, Rebecca discussed it with Tyler. What do you think? Should we do interviews? Tyler shrugged. I don't really want to be on TV, but if it helps other people understand what happened and maybe prevent something like this from happening in other neighborhoods, maybe it's worth it. They decided to do one interview, just to set the record straight. The next day, a news crew came to their house. Amanda Walsh was professional and kind, asking thoughtful questions about how they discovered the fraud and what it felt like to expose someone in a position of power. Tyler talked about the technical aspects of what he'd found, explaining in simple terms how Patricia had used stolen Wi-Fi connections to cover her tracks. Rebecca talked about the harassment and intimidation, and how Patricia had used fear to keep the neighborhood under control. When the interview aired that evening, their phones started ringing off the hook. Some calls were from other neighbors thanking them. Some were from people in other HOA communities sharing their own stories of abuse of power. A few were from lawyers asking if they wanted to join the civil suit against Patricia. But one call stood out. It was from the local police department's cyber crimes unit. They let go. The weeks following Patricia's arrest were a whirlwind of activity in the neighborhood. The HOA called an emergency meeting to elect a new president, and the atmosphere was completely different from the last meeting Rebecca had attended. Instead of fear and intimidation, there was relief and cautious optimism. David ended up being elected as the new president, and one of his first actions was to void all the frivolous fines Patricia had issued in the months leading up to her arrest. Rebecca watched as he announced this decision, and she could see the relief on people's faces. Some neighbors had been struggling to pay the excessive penalties Patricia had imposed on them. "We're starting fresh," David announced at the meeting. "The HOA is supposed to maintain our community and property values, not be used as a weapon to control people. Things are going to be different now." The applause was genuine and heartfelt. Rebecca felt tears in her eyes as she realized how much fear Patricia had instilled in everyone. They'd all been walking on eggshells, afraid of the next violation notice, the next fine, the next confrontation. Now finally they could breathe. But the legal proceedings were just beginning. The federal prosecutor's office contacted Rebecca and Tyler, asking them to testify when the case went to trial. Patricia had initially pleaded not guilty, apparently planning to fight the charges, though her lawyers had to know it was a losing battle given the evidence against her. "The evidence your son gathered is crucial to our case," the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Martinez, explained during a meeting at her office. "His documentation shows a clear pattern of unauthorized access and fraudulent activity. Combined with the physical evidence we seized and the victim testimonies, it's an airtight case." Tyler looked nervous. "I've never testified in court before." "You'll do fine," Martinez assured him. "You just need to tell the truth about what you found and how you found it. That's all." Meanwhile, the investigation had expanded. Other law enforcement agencies discovered that Patricia's operation was even more extensive than initially thought. She'd been part of a larger network of identity thieves, though she appeared to be working independently in their specific area. The total number of victims across multiple states was now over 50 people. Rebecca found herself contacted by several of these victims. One woman, Carol from Ohio, called her in tears. "I lost almost $10,000 because of what that woman did," Carol said. The bank eventually refunded most of it, but the stress, the fear that someone out there had all my personal information, it was horrible. "Thank you for exposing her. Thank you so much." Each conversation like that reminded Rebecca why speaking up had been so important. It wasn't just about a Wi-Fi password or HOA harassment. Real people had been hurt, and Tyler's actions had stopped Patricia from hurting more people. The neighborhood itself was healing too. People who had been isolated and afraid were now talking to each other, sharing their experiences with Patricia's intimidation. They organized a neighborhood barbecue, something that hadn't happened in years because Patricia had always found reasons to shut down community gatherings that she didn't control. Rebecca stood in her backyard during the barbecue, watching Tyler laugh with some neighbors while helping them set up a volleyball net. Her son had grown so much through this experience. He'd learned that his skills could make a real difference, that standing up for what's right mattered even when it was scary. Margaret came over with a plate of food. "You know, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, she said, "and this is the first time I've felt like we're actually a community." Patricia kept everyone separated and afraid. "You changed that." "I just changed a password," Rebecca said with a smile. "No," Margaret said firmly. "You drew a line. You said this isn't okay, and you didn't back down even when she tried to punish you for it. That took courage, and it inspired the rest of us." A few weeks later, Rebecca received surprising news. The civil lawsuit against Patricia was moving forward, and the victims were likely to recover at least some of their losses from Patricia's assets. But more than that, several neighbors had filed their own lawsuit against Patricia for harassment and emotional distress during her time as HOA president. The lawyer handling the case reached out to Rebecca. "We'd like you to be the lead plaintiff," she said. "Your case is the most well-documented, and frankly, you're the one who stood up to her first. Would you be willing?" Rebecca thought about it carefully. She didn't want to be vindictive, but she also knew that Patricia needed to be held accountable, not just for the fraud, but for the years of abuse she'd inflicted on the community. "I'll do it," Rebecca said, "but I want any money I receive to go into a community fund. Use it for neighborhood improvements, scholarships for kids in the community, things like that." The lawyer smiled. "I think we can arrange that." As summer approached, Tyler started his internship with the cybercrimes unit. Rebecca drove him to the police station on his first day, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. Her teenage son was about to work alongside detectives and investigators, using the same skills that had exposed Patricia's crimes. "You nervous?" she asked as they pulled into the parking lot. "A little," Tyler admitted, "but also excited. I mean, how many 16-year-olds get to do something like this?" "Not many," Rebecca said. "Because not many 16-year-olds have your combination of skills and integrity. I'm proud of you, you know that?" Tyler's face turned red, but he smiled. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. You could have just paid those fines and kept your head down. But you didn't. You showed me that sometimes you have to stand up even when it's hard." That conversation stayed with Rebecca as the weeks went on. She'd never thought of herself as particularly brave. She was just a single mom trying to raise her son and live her life. But when pushed, she'd found strength she didn't know she had. Patricia's trial was scheduled for early fall. By that time, her lawyers had seen the evidence and convinced her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and computer fraud. The sentencing hearing was brief but significant. Rebecca and Tyler sat in the courtroom as the judge reviewed the case. Patricia looked nothing like the confident, intimidating HOA president she'd once been. She looked tired and defeated, her expensive clothes replaced by a plain suit, her perfectly styled hair now just pulled back in a simple ponytail. Several victims gave impact statements, describing how Patricia's crimes had affected their lives. The financial losses, yes, but also the violation of privacy, the loss of security, the stress and fear. Carol from Ohio was there, and her testimony was particularly moving. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she kept it simple. What Patricia Hoffman did affected more than just the people whose money she stole. She used her position of power in our community to intimidate and control people. She made us afraid in our own homes, but she also taught us an important lesson about standing up to bullies and abusers, no matter what position they hold. I hope she gets help, but I also hope she faces real consequences for the harm she's caused. The judge sentenced Patricia to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She would also have to pay full restitution to all her victims. As the bailiff led her away, Patricia glanced back at the courtroom and her eyes met Rebecca's for just a moment. Rebecca saw no remorse there, just anger and bitterness. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Rebecca had gotten better at handling media attention, though she still didn't love it. She gave a brief statement thanking law enforcement and encouraging other people to speak up if they suspected fraud or abuse of power in their communities. That evening, the neighborhood held another gathering, this time to celebrate the resolution of the case. It had been months since Patricia's arrest and the community had transformed. People knew each other now. They looked out for each other. The fear that had hung over the neighborhood for years was gone. David, the new HOA president, raised a glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, and everyone quieted down. "To Rebecca and Tyler Chen for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us were too scared. You didn't just expose a criminal, you freed a community." "Thank you." Everyone cheered and applauded. Rebecca felt her face flush, but she also felt grateful. Grateful for her son, for her neighbors, for the support they'd shown each other through this whole ordeal. Later that night, after the guests had left and Tyler had gone to bed, Rebecca sat on her back porch with a cup of tea. She thought about how much had changed since that evening months ago, when Tyler first discovered unauthorized devices on their network. A simple Wi-Fi password change had set off a chain of events that had exposed a major criminal operation, sent someone to prison, helped dozens of victims get justice, and transformed a scared, isolated neighborhood into a real community. She thought about the lessons she'd learned, that standing up for yourself matters even when it's scary, that small acts of courage can have big consequences, that skills and knowledge can be used to help others, that communities are stronger when people support each other instead of living in fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mom, the cyber crimes unit wants me to help with another case next week. Is that okay?" Rebecca smiled and typed back, "Of course. I'm proud of you. So